Think of it as a large spyglass, such as we sailors carry, a device capable of seeing great distances. Bartholomew Roberts, September 1719. Hello, and welcome to Visions of the Past. My name is Andrew, and I'm the host of this Assassin's Creed lore podcast. This is episode 38, and today we're going to talk about the pieces of Eden called the Crystal Skulls. Before we can dive into the Crystal Skulls within the Assassin's Creed series, we have to first talk about the real-life inspiration behind this piece of Eden. A set of human skull hard stone carvings that claim to be pre-Columbian Mesoamerican artifacts by those who allegedly found them. 4 main crystal skulls are known in our world: the Mitchell-Hedges skull, the British Museum skull, the Paris skull, and the Smithsonian skull. While each of these skulls have their own history, the most well-known is the Mitchell-Hedges skull, and most of the myths we hear surrounding the skulls come from this one. Allegedly discovered in 1924 by Anna Mitchell-Hedges, the daughter of British author and adventurer F.A. Mitchell-Hedges, the Mitchell-Hedges skull was allegedly found under a collapsed altar inside a temple in Lubantoon, in the country now known as Belize. F.A. Mitchell-Hedges, though, made no mention of the discovery in any of his writings on Lubantoon. The others, who were present at the time of the excavation, recorded neither the skull's discovery nor Anna's presence at the dig. Anna claimed that her skull could cause visions, cure cancer, and that she once used its magical properties to kill a man. In another instance, she said she saw in it a premonition of the John F. Kennedy assassination. Multiple studies on the skull have concluded it could not have been created by ancient Americans, and there is even evidence that F.A. Mitchell-Hedges purchased the skull at a Sotheby's auction in London on October 15, 1943, from London art dealer Sidney Burney. The other 3 skulls have been similarly tested and found to have been carved sometime between the 18th and 19th centuries, when the interest in ancient culture was abundant, using rotary tools much like what a jeweler would use, except for the Smithsonian skull, which was found to have been carved using carborundum, and is thus being displayed as a modern fake at the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. The idea that the crystal skulls pose paranormal powers is what makes them a perfect addition to the Assassin's Creed series. They were first mentioned in Assassin's Creed, but we didn't see them until the Facebook game Assassin's Creed Project Legacy. And one even shows up within Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. The known history of the crystal skulls in Assassin's Creed begins in 1520, when the Italian Brotherhood of Assassins assigned Giovanni Borgia, the illegitimate son of Lucrezia Borgia, to the crew of Hernan Cortez to search for unknown pieces of Eden in Mexico. While in Mexico, Giovanni found a crystal skull that was in the possession of the Aztecs of Tenochtitlan. He retrieved it from an Aztec priest before it could be utilized in ritual human sacrifice during the chaos that was caused by Cortez's crew when the sacrifice started. Giovanni took the skull to Europe to a scientist by the name of Bombastus, who was an expert in studying pieces of Eden. Bombastus, also known by the name Paracelsus, would subject the skull to multiple tests, but was unable to ascertain its purpose, causing the Brotherhood to dismiss it as nothing more than an ornate treasure. Giovanni, though, continued to study the skull by staring into it for at least an hour a day for the next 22 years. Finally, in 1542, a Chinese man, who some believe to be Emperor Jiajing, who had acquired a different skull, used his skull to communicate with Giovanni. The skulls then fell out of history until 1719, when the sage Bartholomew Roberts agreed to take Edward Kenway to a location in the Caribbean called the Observatory. The observatory housed a large armillary sphere and, at its core, sat a crystal skull. Within the skull was a place for a blood vial, and when a full blood vial was set within the skull, it allowed the user of the skull to see through the eyes and hear through the ears of the person whose blood was in the vial. If the skull was set in the center of the armillary sphere, it would project an image from the skull on the wall behind it. When Roberts and Kenway reached the crystal skull, Roberts activated the skull to see through the eyes of Jack Rackham and Woodes Rogers. After showing Kenway the power of the observatory and the skull, he betrayed Kenway and left him locked inside the observatory. Roberts took the crystal skull with him, keeping it as he sailed through the West Indies and West Africa for the next 3 years. During these 3 years, Roberts used the skull to become one of the most successful pirates, based on the number of ships taken and amount of goods that were stolen. Edward Kenway caught up to Roberts on February 10th, 1722, on the island of Principe, pursuing him along the coast of Africa before boarding the Royal Fortune, killing Roberts and retrieving the crystal skull. Edward used the skull in August of that year while in Havana, trying to find the Templar Grand Master Loreno Torres, leaving the skull in the care of the leader of the Assassins' Bureau within Havana, Rana Dinsmore. Edward would end up assassinating a decoy of Torres. On September 1st, 1722, Edward caught up to Torres at the observatory. After Torres' death within the observatory, Atabai placed the crystal skull back within its original location in the armillary sphere, and sealed the observatory with the hope of keeping the observatory and the skull out of the wrong hands. By 2012, an unknown number of crystal skulls were in the possession of high-ranking employees of Abstergo Industries, most notably Warren Vidic, head of Abstergo's Animus program, and CEO Alan Ricken. An internal email identified these skulls as the Mitchell-Hedges communicators and disclosed the plan for these skulls, which was for them to be used as a secure means of communication after launching Abstergo's iAbstergo satellite. Because of the limited number of skulls in their possession, Abstergo only provided them for the most essential facilities. Powers of the skulls are fairly straightforward. Some allowed for direct communication between themselves, while another kind, when paired with a blood vial, allowed for audio-visual surveillance on the person whom blood was in the vial. There is a third type of skull, according to the Assassin's Creed Essential Guide, that allows for recording and playback, and to send those recordings to other crystal skulls. When you look at Pieces of Eden in general, they allow for an easy way to explain how people have been able to do miraculous things, like creating massive empires. They're also a great way to explain urban legends and conspiracy theories. The crystal skulls fall under the latter category, especially when you consider the claims of Anna Mitchell-Hedges and the abilities of the skull that she held throughout her life. I love that Assassin's Creed uses these artifacts to explain these things, and the crystal skulls are no different. The idea of using the skulls for communication and surveillance works perfectly with the accusations from Anna Mitchell-Hedges that her skull gave her visions and showed her the JFK assassination. As much as I would love to see the skulls return, I think if we get any gameplay or storyline with them, it'll be nothing more than an Easter egg. Anything we see, like showing the skull of the observatory within Black Flag, has most likely long since passed its prime opportunity. Thank you for joining me today. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for new episodes. If you love the Visions of the Past podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions about Assassin's Creed or topics that you'd like me to cover, please feel free to hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at visions_AC, and you'll find those links in this episode's show notes. Until next time, my assassin friends, make sure to follow the creed, and to those Templars listening, may the Father of Understanding guide you.